Welcome to part 2 of week 1 of our dialogue. So yes, Mary, I just wanted to share just something that's been going on for me over the past few weeks. I think we were talking a little bit earlier about we're on lockdown. This is the 4th week now, I think, of lockdown. And so what I've been trying to do in a kind of Goethean heartfelt way is move out into nature and just be a little bit slower, really, because it's so interesting when something like this happens, so unprecedented, that I did find myself getting a bit anxious to start off with and thinking, well, what's this going to mean to me? But then I sort of started to think more upstream. I started to think, well, what would my heart want me to do in this situation? And so I decided to just sort of on my daily walk go out and just really notice and appreciate, particularly at this wonderful time of year, spring, and the weather's been beautiful. And we're really lucky because we have a park just opposite, and just walk around the park, and rather than see my daily walk as exercise, reframe that and actually see my daily walk as an opportunity to have a conversation with nature, and to have a conversation with the trees and the flowers, and just really notice nature coming to life. And that's been a real practice for me over the past 3 weeks. So I'm just sharing some photographs on the slide of just how appreciative I was of the trees that I saw as I was walking around the park, and the tulips in the flower beds, that maybe ordinarily in my day-to-day life I might have missed, or might not even have had the opportunity to even see and engage with, because I was about to start a job, and unfortunately I lost it due to the coronavirus. But it's given me so much more when again I think about what it's given me. So this is, again, following the theme of our dialogue, which is listening and feeling and sensing and seeing. And it's really shown me, even though I try and do this practice as often as I can, and I'm aware of this practice, just how I can get, sort of sucked back into ordinary, normal, in inverted commas, life. I've been walking around the park, and the particular trees that I've been communing with, I've been watching the blossom coming out, and now I'm seeing that the blossom is fading, blossom's dropping off the trees, but these gorgeous different coloured greens are coming through, and it's just like you say, it's a dynamic process. And I think I'm really realising just how I am living alongside nature, and that is living and changing on a daily basis. Minute by minute, even, it's just incredible to really slow and notice and feel like I am in a dynamic, growing relationship with the trees on my daily walk. And it's really felt like a sort of, again, a sort of shift down to the heart and then up to the head for me. So I'm really kind of feeling and sensing this kind of movement. I don't want to call it a process, because that's it's not a process for me. It's a movement that continually spirals and loops back around upon itself. And as I'm talking in that way, I just wanted to share a couple of quotes from Romanishin. And he says that the capacity to listen to, and then I'm sort of adding in words here, to nature in this case, is a disposition in which the words, sorry, let me just, I can't move it across, probably stop the share now, but if I just open that up.
Beautiful photographs.
Yeah, thank you. So just to say, the capacity to listen is a disposition in which the words that the other speaks enter the ear and sink down to the heart before they rise to the brain. And I just love that. I just want to stay with that for a minute. That the words nature speaks, they enter the ear, or they enter all of our senses. And again, I want to add there, enter all of our senses, and they arise or sink into our heart before they rise to the brain. And what would change if we certainly what changes for me when I take on that particular movement is something very different to an ordinary mode of perception. And then the second quote resonates so much with me as well, because the capacity to listen is hard work because it's heart work. And I was really thinking about that this morning. That, you know, gosh, yes, it is. It's hard work doing this.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
It is hard
kind
work.
of
Yes, challenging.
considering that way of thinking.
Yeah.
You know, it is hard work. I'm just going to share that again, so I can now read the bottom quote. It's very, very hard work, and even I have to keep reminding myself to do that. And then, you know, as I think about that, while we might know that the heart is a biological organ, no one actually experiences the heart in that fashion. So when I bring all of this sensory experience and I gather it up in my heart space first, I experience the heart as a biological organ. Of course I do, and that's been no more clearer in my own life, having had all the physical difficulties with my heart that I have had. But also I experience that and so much more. And we're back to this both and expansion again.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
that was really what I wanted to share in the sort of the theme of this week, because, you know, the Goethean inquiry and the heart-based work for me are so intricately linked, that I just don't feel in my own world that I can sort of have, you know, the one without the other.
They're beautiful quotes, Louise, and I think, you know, your commentary alongside them really brings them to life as well, because we have an idea of the heart, I suppose, as you've said, you know, it's either this biological organ just sort of sitting as the main pump in the body, as Harvey demonstrated many years ago, and as, you know, all the sort of rise of the scientific enlightenment, when they started to dissect bodies and really understand how the body worked, which was a very different way to how Leonardo was carving up bodies and understanding how they worked, because he was trying to understand what was behind the phenomena of the body and how things work. So there was a sort of insight there. But I think we think of the heart sometimes either as that biological organ, or, again, it's an either or, it becomes this mushy, sentimental, overly inward looking thing or way of seeing. But the heart is something so much stronger and broader and wider than that, isn't it?
And I mean, you've hit totally on the theme of my research, which, you know, having had the experiences that I've had, you know, the heart itself, like you say, is it can only ever live beyond the biological organ as something that is mushy and sentimental. But that is, again, Mary, that's only through a particular framing, and it's through a particular narrative. And as a kind of scientific narrative, it's reduced to mere metaphor. But if we go back to what we were saying before, and again, this is not to deride or be derogatory about the scientific method, but it's just to say, okay, the scientific labeling of the heart is a pump, and that's perfectly valid. It's an organ of the body. But if we move to a both and way of thinking, then there is another movement that we can make, something that is allowed to come alongside the narrative of the kind of dominant narrative that we have today, which is pretty rationalistic and scientific in its gaze. And rather than it being put subservient, and then in that sense the heart can only live as a metaphor or sentimental mush, if we open up and expand, we can allow something to come in and alongside. So in the moving alongside rather than being put underneath, the heart can live then as something else, which allows us to sense and feel and intuit and imagine. And that has never gone away, and it is open to us. This is something we can gather up and experience. It's just our perception and our way of being educated tells us that we must think about the heart in a particular way. And I would leave with this question, Mary, and then open to you to sort of speak through a Renaissance art point of view. How does bringing another heart alongside the organ of the heart, respectfully and openly, cause any problem to us whatsoever? And I would say it doesn't. I would say that actually adds so much to our experience and our narrative. It doesn't take away anything, it adds more.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you brought up those slides initially of the pictures of nature outside. And of course, you know, as you say, the senses, you know, we sort of think of the senses as something perhaps as well, which is cut off from our internal language and our inner heart, our inner ears, our inner eyes, and so forth. Everything's become so split. But obviously, one of the most wonderful things in the Renaissance was this huge awakening of the senses to the natural world. And nature was understood as maestra. She was mistress. She was absolutely above man, although man was part of nature. But nature was this wonderful aspect of living to honour and to see. And for the Renaissance artists, they had to have both a receptivity to nature, so an ability to open and receive, and that was through the eye. But the eye, as you may or may not know, was the window to the soul at that time, and the soul was obviously connected to the heart. And they had to have a receptivity, but they also had to have an observation. So again, you get this two-way pull. So an openness inwards and an observation outwards towards the world. And probably one of the most well-known artists that everybody knows is Leonardo DaVinci, a prolific outpouring of drawings, which were partly preparatory drawings for later masterpieces or works of art he was commissioned to paint, but lots of them were his own observations of the world itself and how he saw the world. And one of his biographers, who's actually a contemporary biographer, Charles Nicholl, in a wonderful biography he's written about Leonardo da Vinci called Flights of the Mind, and he has written in there, and he says, if I can remember the quote, he says, Leonardo da Vinci had an openness and receptivity to the world around him, an almost explicitly childlike state, which allowed him to see into the heart of things. And it was absolutely this sort of wonderful, keen observation, and also this fascination, wonderment, awe at the world around us, which again we've lost. You know, we're dumbed down. Our senses are so dumbed down, and yet our senses, and in particular for the Renaissance, it was the eye, because of its metaphorical meaning as well, was utterly open to the world around. And I'm just going to show, just for an example, you know, looking at a work of art such as this, which is Leonardo da Vinci's Virgin of the Rocks from the National Gallery. You know, to most people might just sort of wander past, or it might get some attention because it is by Leonardo da Vinci and he's probably one of the most famous paintings from that time. And to most people it would just look like a religious image. I'm not really going to go into it all too much now, but for instance, when he was looking at how to get this wonderful shading on the Virgin's face, he would look at the moon and he'd look at the shadows on the moon, and that's how he would paint and understand the shading that should fall on a female face, but in particular her, because she's a divine figure and she's illuminated. And you'd look at a work of art like that and you might not think, look strange to the modern eye, because there are images that we don't really connect with anymore unless you follow a particular religious train of thought. But they are absolutely embodied and embedded with this wonderful observation of nature. And even down here you've got these tiny little flowers and leaves, which he's absolutely looked at nature and those particular flowers in order to get them accurate, to put them into the painting. As with his observation of gesture, of movement, of emotion in the human body, I've taken some people to look at this painting, and because the eyes are downcast, especially on the Virgin, one participant said once they thought she looked depressed, And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because we're so used to seeing a different sort of image that we're supposed to put to the world, you know, but she's not. She's in her own world of inner conversation. You know, there's a sort of silent conversation going on there between them, and it's between the gesture and the body. But his let's find this other one here. This is one of his very famous drawings that I'm sure lots of people have seen before. But it's the Star of Bethlehem, and it's in red chalk, which is a beautiful medium to use because it's very soft. But it's just wonderful how he's got this exquisite observation of nature, and the behaviour of this particular flower, which gives it a character. You know, it gives it a sort of personality, and his other little sketches around. So, and he drew many flowers, the same flower, he would draw them from lots of different angles, which is an expression really of looking at things from different ways all the time, not just from one way. But they're exquisite drawings, very beautiful, and have their own language and character.
Absolutely, they're beautiful, Mary.
So that was just a couple of pictures really to sort of, you know, not decode and demystify paintings and that sort of thing, but, you know, there's definitely this sense of appreciation, receptivity, and absolute observation and patience, you know, and close attentiveness. You know, these are all qualities that perhaps, you know, resonate with the title of what we have called, you know, sort of what we're talking about today, you know, the noticing, the seeing, the feeling, the listening. You know, how often do we have time to look at nature? And, you know, most people are rushing around with their busy lives. I think this current situation with the coronavirus has actually given people time to slow down. And although people don't like the sense of uncertainty, because we're not used to that either, we want to know what's going to happen. And of course there are worries and fears which are very natural, and are a very real concern. But it's definitely allowed us to slow down and really look and just stand and really watch and observe and be open at the same time to perhaps something that we don't normally see beneath this other layer that we've lathered on top of life. We can't really see what's going on underneath.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think
simplicity and a profundity in it, which is quite beautiful.
Definitely. I mean, I totally agree with you. And I think, you know, what you're, you know, as you were talking then, what particularly came up for me was that, you know, these sort of wider, more expansive ways of seeing in, you know, in your particular narrative and mine, you know, Renaissance art, Goethean inquiry, you know, sort of sinking into the heart first before moving up to the head. It can be sort of used really in any part of our life, you know, to sort of connect with, you know, for example, coronavirus. You know, I found myself, you know, trying to move upstream, trying to watch what's happening for me, particularly in my own world. You know, not really sure a lot of the time what's arising for me in terms of how I'm feeling, and sort of trying to hold more the discomfort that I feel a lot of the time. You know, without sort of reaching for going downstream, reaching for a solution. You know, so these ways of seeing for me, and I, you know, doing these conversations with you, and sort of having more time and reflecting more on my own work and research has, you know, given me beautifully more time to consider, you know, how can I sort of use these ways of seeing, or sort of sit with these ways of seeing. You know, in terms of what's happening in the world at the moment. And, you know, I'm not saying that that's easy either. You know, I'm really finding, probably like most people, this situation very difficult. But there are certainly wider insights I think that I'm getting, particularly in, you know, so walking around the park and taking those photographs and understanding, you know, sort of learning more about what that means to me, and where I would possibly want my life to go, or, you know, what's happening for other people, and, you know, just slowing down, having more time to contemplate, I think, but also being very aware that a lot of the time I don't know. I don't
Yes.
know how I feel. I don't know what's going on, and that can be quite uncomfortable. So it's kind of holding that discomfort as well. I think that these ways of seeing have kind of brought me very present with.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I agree, Louise. It is an interesting time and a challenging time, and a very, you know, for some, incredibly devastating time
Yeah,
as well.
yeah,
I think these are all things that throughout life, though, we experience. I think we're just experiencing it all together in a particular way at
yeah,
this moment. We always have life and death. There's always disease, and there are always cures, and sometimes there aren't. And there's often, you know, we have this sort of plethora of everything that happens, that could possibly happen, going on most of the time in the world. I suppose it's just with this that we're all experiencing it in a different sort of collective way that we're not used to, and we have got an enforced lockdown, which means we don't have the freedom to go out in that sense, and some people perhaps feel their civil liberty is being challenged, but
yeah,
um, the situation is what it is, and you have to try and, as you say, make it the best that you can, or at least perhaps just take the foot off the accelerator and think, I'm going to have to just navigate my way through this the best way I can. And we certainly are not used to not being in control, and I think that's what a lot of people are struggling with, is the sense of a loss of control. Although, you know, ironically, we are being controlled by things other than the virus,
yeah, yeah,
such as the government. But but having said that, I think it's a time for reflection as well, and perhaps people to look at things or read things that they wouldn't normally have time to look at and read. And being in nature, I mean, nature, me living in London, goodness, is certainly louder. You know, the birds are very loud. I can hear all sorts of different layers of bird song every evening and every morning if I stand in my garden. But also the Renaissance, just to finish up what I feel I wanted to share really, is that the plague, which finished around 1350 in Italy, was an absolutely dreadful disease, and it killed millions of the population around Europe. And however, having said that, through that dreadful period with people suffering, there was at the same time this huge rise in empathetic and compassionate religious texts and responses to images. And that's why the whole shift and the change of works of art happened, so that people had more of an effective response. So it actually moved at that time from this sort of scholarly idea of religion just up in the head back down into the heart. And that altered how pictures, how paintings and how sculpture started to look. They weren't just sort of flat, two-dimensional, symbolic looking pictures. They became something which was there to evoke emotion and response in the viewer. So I just wanted to, and then, you know, obviously the Renaissance really sort of took flight at the beginning of the 1400s, and that was just sort of 20, 30, 40 years after the plague had completely died out. So it does seem throughout history that where there's been a big disaster on a certain level, rises up from the ashes in the end.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a really lovely place to kind of leave that, Mary. That just feels very profound.
Oh, thanks, Louise. But yes, did you want to share your sense of where we might be going on our next conversation.
Yeah, definitely. So next time, I think it's next week, isn't it, Mary?
Yes.
We will be, just bear with me a second. So this week we were looking at noticing, seeing, listening and feeling. Next week we're going to be looking at opening. So opening up towards, you know, things that are happening in the world, like we're talking about now, like you were talking about, Mary, with coronavirus and, you know, all these, you know, looking at all the atrocities that are taking place across the world, and, you know, ecological destruction, degradation. You know, how do we open up to consider all of these things that are happening in our world through the ways of seeing that we've been sort of exploring this morning, really, through our own narratives. So that's the idea for next week. Yeah, but also yeah, using our discernment as well. So using the head and the heart, using all of the ways of perception open to us, gathering everything up from the past to the present, ancient to now, and really seeing how we can move forward, you know, with these really pressing global issues today.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely to talk to you, Louise.
Yes, and you, Mary. It's been wonderful, as always. So, yes, so just to say thank you for everyone for joining us, for listening to us today. And if you want to find out more about our work, then please do visit Mary's website, maryatwood.com, or my website, heartsenseresearch.co.uk. Any comments that you have, please, you know, engage us in conversation. This is all part of the dialogue, and we're just really grateful and blessed to have you here. So heartfelt blessings to you all, and hopefully see you next week. Thanks,
you.
Mary.
Thanks for listening. Thanks, Louise.